Welcome back, folks. Here we are on the St. Johns River in Jacksonville, Florida. I drove up from the Space Coast, and Matt and Rossi drove over from Alabama to strike some exciting north and northeast wind. Here we are looking out over one of the river runs we tried that weekend. As you can see, it's pretty windy, but there's not so much depth and fetch here, so we were scouting some zones and it was getting interesting. This is actually Saturday of that weekend, and we'd done a run on Friday already. The Friday run was pouring rain and not quite as windy as this, so we were excited to get a redemption lap of hopefully some better conditions. After we did that run on Friday, we let some of the local crew know about it, and they decided to come out and give it a go. Unbeknownst to us, we got to the top of the run and saw two parrowings buzzing about. It's pretty funny to have the run that had never been done before the day prior have unknown riders on it the second day. So I threw the drone up and got a couple clips of them as we were rigging up in the parking lot. We're throwing our foils together and we were pretty excited to see how powered they were. It looked like there was plenty of wind out there, even if the bumps were pretty small up here at the top of the run. Rossi was as stoked as usual and was trying to convince me to ride a smaller and smaller parawing. He wanted to go out on his 3 meter. Thankfully, Rationale won, and he ended up breaking his 3.5, which he was glad of every bit of that power. Now that we were all rigged up, the next challenge was to get into the water. It was a pretty exciting entry to the river, to say the least. Sort of had to climb down this seawall, and at first we were pretty concerned that there might be barnacles or oysters or something sharp at the bottom. And since the water was pretty brown, to say the least, we were pretty delicate on our first time getting in, just making sure that it wasn't too shallow on the entry. But it was actually a nice sandy bottom, so not actually too bad hopping in. But it was nice to have both Rossi and Matt around to help hand gear into the water and make the entry a little easier. I was riding my Apple Tree mid length with the 1130, a short fuse, and the 150 tail. Matt, who was decided to wing the run, he's on the 55-liter Quiver Killer with a 980 and I believe the 142 tail, and he's on a 4 meter Cabrina. And then Rossi was on his Evo 175, and I was on the 3.6 BRM Kaaha, and Rossi was riding his 3.5 F1 frigate. It was a bit of a paddle out to both the deeper water and the wind line. Something was definitely a little exciting about the brown water, but there was a puff waiting for us right when we got out there and hopped right up on foil. I've been learning a lot about parawing board shaping and pretty stoked to start working on a board design. Definitely a very different design aspect than just the pure efficiency of a downwind board and the kind of everything works of a wingboard. It's been interesting to mess around with it. As you can see, the bumps here at the top in the middle of the river aren't bad, but they're nothing crazy. Rossi got the stow going quickly, but then he wiped out pretty promptly afterwards. So sailed around for a little bit, waiting for him, and then we got it going. Yeah, I think right about here I realized that Rossi has crashed behind me, and I go to relaunch the Parawing. There he goes. So I've been finding this sort of burrito method to work really well with my stowing. Just always making sure that I can get back to the bar in one hand and the leading edge in the other. When I have that method, I've been lucky enough to have probably upper 80 to 90% redeploy rates. But the BRMs just make it so easy with that light material and the short bar and stiff lines and pretty short lines on the Kaha. It's the perfect storm of just easy use. I've been reluctant to get a stash belt because this old recycled camelback backpack has been working so well, but there are definitely some benefits to not having to samurai sword the parrowing over your shoulder into the backpack. Excuse the staring at the nose of my board while I pump as I tool around to get this thing in here. All right, off to the races. Rossi had gotten up behind me, and we were starting to make our way down the river now. So the fetch was starting to get a little better, but it definitely wasn't anything crazy. The wind inshore this day was unfortunately quite lighter than forecast. This is probably 18 to 20 knots, so plenty for there to be bumps, but not as windy as we were hoping for this strike mission. The bumps on this section of the river were probably knee high. It did get better as we went further downhill, especially as we got to a couple segments where there was some adverse current. Matt has been having some successes both sup downwinding and parawinging, but the unknowns of this run, especially with long segments where you couldn't get out, he decided to go with the wing, which I don't think is a bad call at all. I think if you want to ascend with your friends and you're working on skills, grab the wing. Why not? This is kind of a better segment to see. This is one of the more fun areas in the run. And you can just see, bumps aren't big. Maybe we're sort of thigh high here, but just super surfy and kind of the ability to do a lot of back and forth. A lot of extra miles were ridden on this run. Threw the parrowing out for a second here just to try to get some better clips of Matt, and then ended up kind of failing to do that, but we got a couple. He was definitely wishing he had a little more foil. The 980 was able to keep up, but just you had to go sideways an awful lot. Otherwise, you were running into the bump in front. It was interesting to compare the 1130 and the Evo 175 speed wise. In size, they're almost the exact same, but clearly there's some big differences in foil section and design because Rossi was just crawling along in comparison to me. I was in no way trying to race, and I was always going probably 10% faster than him, which was pretty interesting. But he did say that he was having a lot of fun surfing. I was as well, but I think in a perfect world, I probably would have been on a 1300. I think I would have been cruising a lot more and pumping a little less. Rossi's out here finding his flow show. There were definitely some super fun segments, but as we talked about at the end of the run, we were kind of doing this for the exploration factor. That being said, there is something just awesome about small, clean, groomed bumps. Definitely the good sections were there. You had to work for them, but when you found 5 or 6 of those waist high lumps in a row and it was just like powder snowboard turns for days. This reminded me of kind of the Jersey Bay, but if it was only blowing 12 knots. I'm on the hunt here, kind of finding a decent little section here, little runner. We finally caught up to our dark horses from the beginning of the run, and turns out they are Timmy and his buddy, who had seen our messages from the run we did the previous day and decided to go give it a spin for themselves. Too funny that we literally ended up accidentally coordinating to do the run at the same time. Since they staged their run based on our Garmin screenshots, they had a slightly different exit point, so we unfortunately didn't see him at the end of the run. Can't lie, there is nothing appealing about paddling through this brown murky water. Would much rather have sharks be the fear than a gator. We did run into our secret senders at the top of the run, and it was cool to say hi. Here are our Garmin tracks. The first run was about 16 miles and the second about 14. But the run the first day got light and the bumps were pretty small in some segments, so both Rossi and I did some sailing on the Parawing, hence the extra couple miles of distance.